Hello and welcome to Making Media Now, the Filmmakers Collaborative podcast. I'm your host, Michael Azevedo. Joining me on this episode is Jon Shenk, co-director of a powerful documentary now streaming on Netflix called In Waves and War. The film traces the journey of three Navy SEALs tormented by trauma to Mexico, where they embark on a mission to rescue one another with powerful psychedelics, whose effects shake them to the core and open a path toward healing. Alongside intimate interviews, captivating animation, and first-of-its-kind research at Stanford's Brain Stimulation Lab, In Waves and War is the emotional, inspiring odyssey of these three American heroes as they overcome the aftereffects of war and rediscover their humanity. Here's the film's trailer.
At first, I was just wondering, when is this going to start?
The medicine brings out things it wants you to see, and you don't know why.
I had a lot of stuff to work through.
Navy SEAL training is one of the most demanding things on the planet.
It was like being drafted and going to the Patriots. It was everything I ever wanted.
The worse the place was, the more we wanted to go.
It felt like Russian roulette. Every time he would leave, he may not come home.
Everything that could have gone wrong went wrong.
We got discovered.
I can't fire back because I can't see anybody.
I thought my arm was gone, and I can't feel anything.
Blood and bullets spewed all over that thing. Just...
You go overseas and you see half your platoon get killed. We're not supposed to leave them.
I was just begging. Can you please help him?
The TBI and with the memory loss, I'd meet someone, I don't know what your name is, no idea.
He was doing all the things he was told to do, and he was actually getting worse. I got his medical records. I completely changed my approach. Psychedelic medicines proved to be effective, but both are illegal in the United States. So Marcus would have to travel to Mexico.
If you love your wife, you'll go to Mexico and do psychedelics.
All the body armor you put on, that all goes away.
My brothers, my teammates, you deserve to be happy and live a good life.
This is just one of those points in medicine where I've got to have the courage to jump.
That medicine takes you right to the crest and you fall off.
You get into this line of work because we feel like it's who we are. Who the hell am I now?
Jon Shenk is an Academy Award-nominated filmmaker and winner of both Emmy and Independent Spirit Awards. Previously, Jon and Bonni Cohen, who is also Jon's wife, co-directed Athlete A, which won an Emmy for Outstanding Investigative Documentary and was nominated for 5 Critics' Choice Documentary Awards, including for Best Sports Documentary. Jon spoke to me from San Francisco. Making Media Now is sponsored by Filmmakers Collaborative, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting media makers from across the creative spectrum. From providing fiscal sponsorship to presenting an array of informative and educational programs, Filmmakers Collaborative supports creatives at every step in their journey. To learn more, visit filmmakerscollab.org. And as always, if you're enjoying this podcast, please do give it a like, a share, and a follow. Now on to my conversation with Jon Shenk. Jon Shenk, welcome to Making Media Now.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
It is a pleasure to be speaking with you today about your film In Waves and War, a incredibly powerful documentary that is available on Netflix currently, wherein you tell the story of 3 former Navy SEALs with PTSD who turned to a unexpected and unorthodox treatment for healing and hope, and that unorthodox treatment is psychedelic-assisted therapy. So right off the top, I'd like to ask you how this story found you, or how you found this story. What was your way in? Did you hear about the treatment, or did you have some relationship with any of the 3 primary individuals that your film covers?
One of our executive producers, Jameis McNiven, introduced us to Amber and Marcus Capone, who you meet in the film. This was 2019. About a year and a half before that, Marcus had been down to Mexico to do this alternative therapy that you also see in the film, this very intense psychedelic therapy, because his wife Amber had kind of gotten to her wits' end with what you might call the kind of standard ways that the VA and other medical facilities that Marcus had been to was trying to treat his traumatic brain injuries, his symptoms of PTSD. He had really gotten to the point after 13 years of service in the SEAL teams, mostly during the global war on terror in Afghanistan and Iraq, where he didn't know which end was up anymore, right. And nothing was helping. He was trying talk therapy and I don't know, dozens of different medications, and was frankly suicidal and depressed. And Amber started researching alternative treatments and came up with this.
And she's researching these alternative treatments. She comes up with this, and when she shares her findings with him, he's not exactly open-minded in receiving her recommendation.
Yeah, in the film, you hear Marcus react to Amber's suggestion that Amber says, I think you really need to try this for the good of yourself and me and the kids, or else. I'm thinking about leaving this marriage. I have to protect my children. Marcus had shown some violent tendencies. He was drinking a lot. And Marcus kind of thought, well, I don't know anything about this stuff. This kind of seemed like sort of hippie stuff to him. He's talking about psychedelic treatments and so forth. He figured those drugs were addictive and kind of recreational things that the counterculture used. And so he went down reluctantly, but he did it. And as he says in the film, the next day he woke up feeling 1,000 times better. It was just an amazing turnaround for him. And he also had the thought pretty quickly, along with Amber, that they needed to spread the word about this because it really seemed to help him. And if it helped him, it seems like it might be able to help some of his friends who were also suffering.
Yeah, in around 2019, Marcus and Amber, they began an organization called Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, or VETS. And in your film, we primarily focus, along with Marcus and his story, on Matty Roberts and DJ Shipley. And one of the things I really enjoyed about your film was you spend a good deal of time, particularly in the beginning of the film, immersing viewers in the world and in the mindset and sort of the ethos of the Navy SEALs. Talk to me a little bit about why you thought that was so important to kind of give the viewer that foundational experience of the world these guys were operating in.
Exactly. Bonni and I, my co-director, Bonni Cohen, who's also my wife and longtime filmmaking partner, when we started to kind of feel the outlines of the story and get a sense of how we were going to tell it in the film, one thing that became clear right away, which is we had to give the audience a sense of the culture of the SEALs. And also, in addition to that, what they had been through in the last 15 or 20 years.
Yeah.
I mean, all Americans know that our country's been, from 2001, when, after 9/11, for the next 20 years or so, we were at war. And of course, we know it's the longest military campaign in American history and all that. I don't know if Americans know that special forces really bore the brunt of a lot of the missions of this war. Navy SEALs, for example, went from deploying kind of every once in a while, maybe a couple of times a year, to 300 times a year.
Yeah.
They were on night after night, mission after mission, barely time to catch their breath before they were back out on another one. So we spent some time early in the film showing that. We got amazing personal archives from Marcus, DJ, and Matty. We were able to show what they faced on the ground in these battles. We highlight a couple of battles in particular to really kind of show what their stressors were, what their battle trauma looked like.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You also, the viewer gets a sense of their mindset going into becoming Navy SEALs. There's references to formative experiences in their childhood, and this is even prior to undergoing any of the psychedelic therapy. And it seemed, not to make generalizations, but it seemed that the three of them were kind of united in their sense of what constituted masculinity, what constituted strength and honor, and how the Navy SEALs really tap into that as a propulsive force toward creating these elite fighting units.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We before we started filming, we spent a lot of time interviewing retired SEALs. Many of them had been through the treatment in Mexico and had gained, I think, what you would call psychological insight or perspective on their own lives, kind of
Yep.
a little bit of understanding of, why did I do this in the first place? What made me join the military? How did that experience in those battles affect me, and how did my behavior change? Those kinds of questions seem to be clearer in their head than they had been earlier in their life. And one of the things we started thinking about, which kind of was new to me, maybe I'm naive, but Bonnie and me were kind of surprised that many of them talked about early childhood experiences, in some cases making the link directly between kind of stuff they had been through as kids,
Right.
and the decision to become a special forces, soldier. For example, Marcus says he was bullied in school. You learn that pretty early in the film. He was this tall, skinny kid from Long Island. He was interested in sports, but he was bullied. He was kind of, pushed around. And, there was a moment in his life where he bulked up and he gained a lot of weight. And he says, I didn't take shit anymore. And it felt important at the time we were learning it, and it grew in importance as we learned about what they went through under the influence of these psychedelics as well. So we wanted to plant those seeds early in the film as kind of breadcrumbs in a way for the audience, so that later on, when they see just kind of how, I don't know, mind-blowing these insights are for these guys under the experience of this particular drug, ibogaine, that that the emphasis won't come out of the blue. On the other hand, I think you can't help but to be somewhat surprised by, what these guys discover.
Yeah, and in your depiction of the training of the Navy SEALs and the camaraderie between them, you really get the sense that they are so united by the ethos of the tribe, and they have almost a language that is unique to them, and also this sense of being there for each other. Really superhuman sort of toughness. I mean, I think Marcus, as you mentioned, spent 13 years, went on multiple tours, and tours wherein he would experience things that could reduce any other person to just a complete rubble. And he experiences that, spends a little bit of time away, and then goes right back. Did you get the sense, when you were speaking to the subjects that ended up in the film, that being a Navy SEAL was so core to their identity that there was almost a fear factor, regardless of all the hell they had been through and experienced, that the fear factor of what they would be like and what life would be like outside of that setting was even more frightening?
Yeah, I think you're putting your finger on two very important themes for these guys. One is when they join the teams as, teenagers, and in DJ's case, college grads. In the case of Marcus and Maddie, these are young men who have an inkling that this new, chapter in their life is going to give them purpose, and boy, does it deliver. Like they talk about kind of feeling this sense of belonging, the sense of purpose, the sense of brotherhood, the sense of love, this acceptance. And as they go on and into this kind of intense period of deployment, during their careers, the sense of purpose and drive to be there for their for their fellow SEALs just gets more and more intense. You know, there's a sense that if you can pick yourself up and get back out there, you got to get back out there. That's your purpose, is to not necessarily fight the particular battle, but to be there for your brothers.
Mm-hmm.
That was a theme, and of course you know that from other war stories and veteran stories, but it really seemed to be quite a driving force in these guys' life that they if they couldn't get back out there, they felt a tremendous sense of guilt. Maddie says that in the film. You know, it's like he has these kind of brain injuries that are keeping him from going back out to battle, but he almost wishes that he had lost a limb so he would have a better excuse, so to speak, about why he's not out there, defending his fellow SEALs.
Yeah, because an outsider can look at him with a missing limb and say, oh, that's why you're not fighting. You're not seeing the brain injury. And while it's difficult to pinpoint, even with all of the archival footage that you have, that, oh, this event led to the trauma for this individual, early on in the film, you go into some great detail about something known as Operation Red Wing. Can you give us a little bit of insight into that and how that became such a cataclysmic event?
Sure. Yeah. Operation Red Wings was represented the largest loss of life in Navy SEAL history. It happened in 2005 in Afghanistan. It was kind of a simple, reconnaissance mission that went awry. It started by some SEALs getting the command to go out and just do some basic surveillance of a Taliban commander in the mountains in Afghanistan, and one thing led to another. These guys were discovered. A battle broke out. There was a gunfight, and then really the tragedy was when a helicopter full of SEALs went to try to rescue these guys during the fight. The helicopter was shot down, and the loss of life, kind of was exponential at that point. I think 11 SEALs died that day. It was awful, and it was a real wake up call that, hey, we're special forces, but we're not immortal. We're bad things can happen, and the community is not that large. So when almost a dozen guys die, that's a dozen families. They're a tight-knit group. It was really kind of a bomb that went off in that community. One of our guys, Matty Roberts, who we show in the film, was supposed to be on that helicopter and got off at the last second, and then he ends up having to help clean up the aftermath of that battle, and it's just psychologically torture for him. So yeah, that's Red Wings. It's a many guys in the teams have the date of that battle tattooed on their arms and bodies, because it's such an important memorial moment in Navy SEAL history.
Yeah, and it's such a sort of unifying event even within your film, because one of the casualties of that operation is a guy named Danny Dietz, correct?
Yes.
And at the time, he's married to a woman named Patsy. But as I guess happenstance would have it, Patsy comes around to meet and then go on to marry DJ Shipley. Which came first in terms of your knowing the story? That did you say, oh, we've got this woman Patsy whose husband was killed horribly in this Operation Red Wings, or did you know her as DJ's wife first?
We knew her as DJ's wife first. We found out about DJ. Marcus Capone had said that he'd worked with DJ, and this idea started forming that we could make a film about Marcus, DJ, and Maddie, because they all had, you see in the film, they all have these connections,
right?
Kind of connected dots from one to the other, having worked with each other. And we started thinking of the film based on what we had researched, which is that these guys have that tremendous sense of camaraderie and protection that I was talking about earlier, remains when they're veterans, and they really are driven to want to find help for one another, during this kind of quote unquote new battle that they're facing, which is an epidemic of suicide among special operators, American veterans in general. And they're kind of pulling each other out of the metaphorical ditch, right?
Yeah.
And so we thought, okay, we got to go meet DJ in order to, start telling that part of the story. And when we arrived in Virginia Beach, we met Patsy, and we started hearing about Patsy. And of course, you give some of the details. Her backstory is just amazing. She's just an incredibly warm, articulate person. Clearly, she and DJ share this amazing love for one another and respect. And then she also has this backstory, which directly connects to Danny Dietz was one of the 4 original Navy SEALs involved in that reconnaissance mission as part of Operation Red Wings. He's actually, Danny Dietz is portrayed in a Hollywood film about this battle called Lone Survivor, which Peter Berg directed.
Sure.
Patsy is a significant figure in SEAL history because she was married to Danny, and now she's married to DJ.
And she herself had been in the Navy, correct?
She herself had been in the Navy. She has this very rich backstory. The story of how she and DJ get together, which we tell part of in the film, is amazing. So we said to Patsy, look, we would really like to include your story in addition to DJ. And she said, no, it's not about me. And we tried to convince her otherwise. One of the amazing pieces of this film that blew us away was how important the wives were to their husbands. The wives are the heroes of the story. Amber really does save her husband's life, and Patsy really does save DJ's life. And so just from that alone, we wanted to include Patsy. And we did something unusual, Michael, which is that we said to Patsy, look, why don't we shoot an interview? And then we can just sit on it. You can read the transcript. You can see how it feels to tell your story. We don't need you to sign an appearance release right away. We'll just sit on it. And we did that. We shot the interview, her main interview in the film, and we allowed some time to go by, and we talked again. And I think Patsy came to the conclusion that the other participants in the film came to, which is this feels important. It feels like whatever discomfort I might have personally of telling this story is offset and then some by the potential good that it could do for other people who are suffering.
Yeah, and I don't want to drop any spoilers because I really do want people to go and watch this film. But they're further on in the film, there revelations around certain dynamics in Patsy's marriage to DJ are revealed, and that is very revealing on both of their parts, which I think just says an enormous amount about the trust that you had built with them in terms of having the depths of those conversations. But when you talk about the role of the wives, particularly Patsy and Amber, it is so profound, and it is such an interesting distinction in what constitutes strength. Like the 3 main characters, Marcus and Maddie and DJ, it looks like you had cast the film from like a central casting perspective. These guys are all very good looking. They look like they could be current day football players. They're big and they're cut, etc. And they display a very visceral strength. The wives display a different type of strength. They have to keep the family running. They have to keep their finger on the pulse of their relationship. And they also have to discern within their relationships with their partners, what's bravado, what's he hiding, what's manipulation. So it's a fascinating distinction.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're putting your finger on something that's absolutely true. These guys are kind of these bigger than life superheroes in a way. I mean, I thought of the Navy SEALs that way. I didn't even know much about the Navy SEALs, other than kind of what you read in the newspaper and see images of. I think that's how Americans think of these guys, and boy, do these guys deliver, right? And by the way, a lot of these guys are like that. It didn't take much casting, so to speak, because so many of these guys they're focused, both physically and mentally. They're driven, they're ambitious, They're if you were Bonnie and I would joke like if you were in trouble, if something went down in your life, you would want these guys around. They're because they're not just strong, but they're strategic and they're well trained.
Right.
Their wives have this other kind of power and intelligence and warmth that is also superhuman. And the film, in a way, I don't know how to articulate it, but it kind of slowly peels back the importance of that other type of intelligence, not just on behalf of the wives, but also kind of what exists under the surface with Marcus, DJ, and Maddie as well, because they discover so much about themselves and they kind of get emotional insight, I think, into what drives them, and that can't help but make them warmer and more kind of psychologically engaging along the way.
Yes, to varying degrees, each of the three realize that to their frustration, and frustration is really underselling it, to their realization that everything that they've moved through their life with constituting strength was still not strong enough to protect them from the psychological damage that they had endured, which actually just adds to the challenge because they feel like they failed. Because again, all of the messaging they've been getting throughout life is that strength, there is mostly a physical component. It's tactical, it's strategic, etc. But they could be as undermined by PTSD, at a hulking 225 pounds of muscle, as a 150-pound accountant, right? There's no distinction. There's no distinction in that. Along the lines of the PTSD, do you have a sense of the instances of PTSD among, say, Navy SEALs compared to that of other combat units? What was the ratio like?
That's a good question. I don't know the statistics. I do know that this conflict, the global war on terror, created kind of I don't know. I think maybe the way to contextualize what these guys are going through in these contemporary conflicts is that we have learned more and more about PTSD over the decades, right? Like John Huston famously made a film in the 40s about shell shock, with soldiers returning from World War II who had been clearly traumatized by what they had been through. The film was actually banned in the U.S. It was so shocking what he discovered in that documentary. And then in Vietnam, of course, I think we in the 70s and 80s we started to label this as a psychological problem,
right?
From our returning veterans. In Afghanistan and Iraq, one thing that happened is that, first of all, it was sustained. Like I said, these guys were in mission after mission on their deployments. New things came to be understood. The PTSD symptoms as partly a result of traumatic brain injury, which is the result of shoulder-mounted missiles breaching doorways, even small arms fired day after day. These are physical wounds that happen inside the brain, so they're kind of invisible, that contribute to these symptoms. It's all to say that we're learning more, and combined with the sustained combat that these guys went through, and the fact that so many people physically survive, so many more soldiers physically survive battle wounds these days. Our emergency medical services in the field are unbelievable. The battlefield survival rate in Afghanistan and Iraq, I don't know the exact numbers, but it is much higher than previous conflicts. So soldiers are coming back from battles surviving physical wounds that they might not have survived. And therefore, I think we're seeing a higher percentage of people with these kind of symptoms of what you might call operator syndrome or PTSD, which I think in and of itself we've gotten a more complex, nuanced view of. That's not just emotional and psychological, but also literally traumatic brain injury from their proximity to high pressure explosives and that kind of thing. So I just think that we're seeing much more of this than that we've seen in previous conflicts.
And before the three individuals in the film that eventually undergo the psychedelic therapy, before they engage in that, all of them had been undergoing more sort of orthodox therapies and been on a lot of medications. Were any of them feeling anything that was measurable in terms of an improvement?
What you hear in the film when we ask the guys about this is that generally no, the conventional therapies for what these guys were feeling, which was hypervigilance, anxiety, depression, suicidality, really intense, unpleasant symptoms day to day, compounding year after year. The kinds of medications these guys were on, SSRIs and SSNRI, all these things, painkillers, tranquilizers, some, things to sleep. There's medication to have, against nightmares, all these kinds of things, which are tools in the box, we're not able to pick them up out of the depths of their despair. And unfortunately, one of the proximate kind of, I don't know, moments that happens for a lot of these guys is they lose a friend to suicide. And that's kind of often the thing that kind of really sets them over the edge and makes it almost impossible for them to see kind of hope at the end of the tunnel. And so yeah, the simple answer to your question is not for many of the people that Bonni and I interviewed, and certainly not for our main characters.
Yeah, and speaking of suicide, there's an individual in your film that calls out just a shocking statistic relative to veteran suicides, that since 9/11, there have been about 7,100 combat casualties of U.S. soldiers, but 30,100 veteran suicides since 9/11, averaging around 22 a day. So it's within this context that Amber is kind of at the end of her rope, and she hears about psychedelic therapies taking place using two items, one called ibogaine and the other one called 5-MeO DMT, which is derived from the venom of the Sonoran desert toad. So my first question is, whoever thought of putting those two things together?
Actually, that's a great question. We had the same question. These are two psychedelics that I certainly had never heard of prior to this project. And who knew enough about this, not only to know about these psychedelic medications, but thought, these might work in concert with each other to complement one another. There was a kind of a young Mexican-American woman in the area of the Sonora Desert down in Mexico where this toad lives. And she had known about the toad medicine, so to speak, just from her, her community. She had happened to take a job working in a clinic where they were giving ibogaine to veterans and opioid addicts. And she was kind of had a sort of a researcher's mind, and she one day dawned on her that some of the after effects of ibogaine are so harsh that perhaps this other medication might help people kind of come back to reality, so to speak, or to help make sense of their ibogaine experience. And it turned out to be, at least kind of in this clinic, a very successful combination for veterans. They were coming back from these treatments seemingly with a kind of a whole new perspective on their lives and a sense of hope for the first time in years. And so it kind of became a protocol of sorts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as your film details it, the way they kind of work together is the ibogaine resets there's a physiological reset of the nervous system, and then the 5-MeO DMT, the toad venom, allows you to sort of release what the ibogaine has brought to the surface. How long had this protocol been underway before the folks at Stanford got wind of it and decided to expand the study?
When Amber Capone saw Marcus and experienced what she describes as transformation after this treatment, she was very interested in a number of things. One was she really wanted to tell other families about it who had been through similar stuff. Another was she really wanted to know the answer to that question. What is the science behind this? What's happening here chemically and emotionally that's causing this reaction? And she started calling around. I mean, and to her own description, kind of naively, just calling anybody that would listen to her. And she's this self-described housewife from Texas of a military wife, and she's suddenly asking, renowned neuroscientists who study, psychopharmacological medicines to look into this drug, and they're, 99% of them wouldn't take her calls. One guy got her call, received her call. He happened to be a Stanford professor in the neurosciences, Nolan Williams, and Dr. Williams had read and knew a little bit about ibogaine, and the description that Amber gave kind of jibed with what he knew. It made sense. It made logical sense to him, and he thought, "Wow, if there was a way to do a study on this, I'd be interested in that." And one thing led to another, and one of the kind of threads of the film that we're very excited to present here is the study. We actually were in on the ground floor. We were able to be in the room with special operators prior to going down to Mexico, and then after they came back, and you see the battery of tests, imaging, psychological measures, that kind of thing that they went through to try to measure, at least kind of in an observational way, what they were going through. And the results were stunning. I mean, this isn't fly-by-night science. These are Stanford neuroscience, doctors looking into this. And what they found was that from an observational perspective, there's something going on specifically with ibogaine that is obviously emotionally important to these guys, but could be physically important in the sense that it could be the basis for new nerve cell growth in the brain. We don't know the answers definitively yet to these things because more study is needed, but certainly enough to be published in the journal Nature, and certainly enough to be to warrant further study. So the film shows that kind of early days of studying ibogaine in a highly organized way.
One of the really fascinating and super impactful techniques that you use in your film is this great animation to depict what is happening during the psychedelic experiences that these men go through. How did you come to the conclusion about how you wanted to depict that experience and make the decision to go to do it via animation?
When I was telling you before, we met dozens of retired SEALs kind of in the early stages of this project. And one thing stood out to us, which is that every single one of them told us a story about ibogaine that started with something like, it was like a movie. It was like a slideshow.
Yeah.
It was like an iPad that you could swipe. It was like that movie Minority Report, where you could swipe images from your scenes from your life and kind of look at it and think about it. And Bonnie and I just looked at each other and thought, how the heck are we going to do that? It seemed so important to these guys, these kind of visual experiences they were having under the influence of ibogaine. It wasn't like, I'm sure a lot of Americans have had the experience of talking to friends, or maybe they've even experimented with psilocybin or LSD or something like that. And they talk about colors or vague visuals. This was very specific.
Right.
Like I was able to go back to my childhood home and watch my mom and dad interact, but I saw it in a new way that gave me insight into the person I became, that kind of thing. Like 20 years of therapy kind of insight, kind of descriptions. And so long story short, we knew pretty much right away that we would have to use some kind of animation. And we were so excited to pair up with a group of animators in London called Studio AKA, who really took the task to heart, and we kind of painstakingly recreated based on description what Marcus and DJ and Maddie told us. And we actually worked with them as well. We showed them storyboards and we asked them, does this look like? And we took documentary evidence from their life, and then we incorporated that into the ibogaine, because that often it's like, that's what they're describing, right? Like scenes.
Yes.
Marcus, for example, and Amber gave us access to crates and crates of pictures and videos and archive from their personal life. And when you see Marcus in his Ibogaine, he's floating through a sea of that stuff.
Right.
Because that's what he described. It's one of those things you have to see it to really appreciate it. We're proud of it. We're quite, as artists, we're just kind of kids in a candy store to work with these animators and bring those psychological journeys to life.
Yeah, it's so effective, and it's interesting because there is a certain uniformity to the nature of the experience that comes up, and yet the way these guys are engaging with what comes before them is very distinct to their personality. I mean, the way you depict Matty Roberts' experience, it certainly doesn't look like, oh, I took a pill and everything is great. That's an arduous experience.
Oh yeah. People who do a significant dose of Ibogaine say it's one of the most punishing, difficult things they ever did. And, it's very unique. It's not to say that it's the same for everybody.
Right.
Everybody has a different story to tell. Everybody has different experiences. One kind of interesting behind the scenes detail is that the animation studio ended up pairing a different artist with each of our main characters. So
interesting.
So we had kind of a one-to-one relationship with these artists, and we had ground rules, like the world had a certain type of physics to it, but on the other hand, each artist took it in the direction based on each subject's description. And so it has I'm glad you appreciated it. It has kind of an otherworldly feel. At the same time, it's really emotionally really vivid, and you really get a sense of what these guys go through.
Yeah, most definitely. And it's interesting to hear their language when they describe it too, in terms of tapping into the subconscious, stripping away the ego. So the subconscious and the ego, neither of which is going to show up in a CAT scan, right? So the neurologists back in Stanford can't say, oh, look what it's doing to the subconscious. How do the neurologists wrap a scientific neurological context around what's happening in the brain, or is that still being studied?
My sense of it is that it's a couple of things. They do what you might call diagnostic physical tests on these guys. Whether it's electric brain scans of brainwave function and that kind of thing, MRIs of their brain so they can see brain activity. And then I think those are combined with neurological tests, psychological measures. There's standardized tests that psychiatrists and neurologists have come up with over the years to determine kind of emotional health and psychological function and these kinds of things. Psychiatry by nature is partly, an art combined with a science, right?
Sure.
You're trying to put scientific terms to things that, like you said, are stories, are nuanced things. But I was actually kind of amazed by how standardized these things, like clinical depression, for example, or hypervigilance, neuroses. These are things that you can measure by asking a patient questions and having them solve puzzles and these kinds of things. And that's what you see in the film, is that they put them through a battery of these things to really get a sense of where these guys are psychiatrically before they go down to Mexico and then afterwards. It's also something that you can't really describe, but you just kind of have to see. And in the film, you're able to see that firsthand. We were with these guys before, during, and after, and of course we edited the film, but a lot of the footage just kind of plays out. Like you see it happen, and the viewer can be the judge as to what's going on.
Yeah, I felt like the before and after, particularly with Matty Roberts, was palpable. There was just something about his face, something about the light in his eyes. There was a hesitancy and a reticence, prior to his experience in Mexico versus after, but even more so, and I assume you obtained this footage from Stanford, the interviews with a lot of the subjects. I think the only one whose name I recall is Elias. In the before conversations with these guys, you can feel the discomfort. You can feel the weight of the PTSD that they're carrying around. And afterward, just the tone of their voice, you actually hear them laugh, you see them smile. It's remarkable.
Yeah, there might be people out there that look at this film and think, "Oh my gosh, this must be some kind of cherry-picked, like
Sure.
footage where you're showing the effectiveness of this." Michael, that was our experience. We witnessed these 30 subjects of the Stanford study, dozens and dozens more other guys just go through the treatment. There was a universality about kind of the before and after. What is it? Exactly what is happening? I think that's why we need more study of these things. But Nolan Williams tells this story, which I thought is kind of an interesting way of looking at this. And bear with me. But back in the day when international sailing became a thing, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, sailors started noticing that they were getting sick with this thing that we now call scurvy. Scientists at the time figured out that if you had certain fruits and vegetables on those ships, that the guys weren't getting sick. It was 100%, right? Like if you add oranges to the diet of a sailor who's at sea for hundreds of days, they won't get scurvy. And it didn't take much scientific rigor to figure that out, right? Humans kind of understood right away. Okay, that's something we need to do from now on. And I don't know if it's a perfect metaphor, but a lot of these psychedelic medicines, so to speak, they do occur in nature. Ibogaine is from a plant. The toad is from an animal. You could argue these are kind of part of the food chain, right? Like they're growing out there. Psychedelic mushrooms grow in fields, animals that live in vicinity to these things occasionally eat them because who knows why, right? They're attracted to them. My point is that I think that when we as a society made these medicines off limits back in the early 70s, we turned our back on some important things that might be worth looking at. I'm not some kind of hippy dippy true believer in this stuff. I didn't come at it from that perspective. I just came at it as a storyteller, and I saw what I saw with my own eyes, including the science that was being done, and it seemed like something like that scurvy story, right? Like these guys went down, they're depressed, they're suicidal, they're at their wits' end, they don't know how to go on, and then afterwards, for some reason, they seem to feel hopeful and lighter again in terms of their emotional state.
And is the thinking that after an initial experience and then they go back to their lives and one would assume that at least some of them are still undergoing, whatever it's going to be, talk therapy. I think you show Maddie with a therapist. Is the thinking that in X number of months or in another year or whatever they will have the ibogaine experience again, or are people not cycling through it that way?
In the film, Marcus Capone says psychedelics are not a magic bullet. They seem to be most effective when people go into it with clear intentions and kind of a lot of forethought about what they're trying to accomplish.
The whole set and setting ethos.
Yeah, the whole set and setting thing. And they also seem to be effective when you kind of take your experiences and what they call integration. That you bring that into your present day life. You sort of bring it home with you and you kind of figure out how to integrate that. That could be done through meditation, exercise, lifestyle, talk therapy, any number of ways, maybe all of the above. In addition to that, Marcus will tell you that he's been down, I think, 5 or 6 times since his initial visit. He continues to do it roughly once a year. He feels like maybe he might be done now. Other guys have only done it once and have seemed to go back to their families and have a fairly healthy life. I don't know what the ultimate. I don't know if anybody knows what the exact right answer is. I think it's probably individual based. But it's certainly not a magic pill that you take and go to sleep and wake up and you're cured. It's more complicated than that. We try to show that in the film. The very last scene in the film is Maddie in therapy,
Sure.
Just to give you a clue of kind of the ongoing importance of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if any of these guys think of it this way, but I was certainly thinking of it this way in the sense that, that Navy SEAL mindset, that leadership mindset, whether these guys think so or not, them serving as sort of pioneers for this therapeutic pathway, they are truly serving their fellow servicemen and women in a different fashion, but they're still exhibiting bravery. They're going into an unknown place, and they are putting they're taking that risk on behalf of not just themselves but others.
I love that you got that from the film. I certainly feel that way. I these guys, when duty called, they stepped up for whatever
Yes.
reason, right? Something about their lives made them feel that call. And so I think that something equally important is calling them now. It feels like that when you're kind of hanging out with them and listening to their conversations. It's not a sideline to their life. It is their life. They feel like the simple way to say it is they don't want to, it's kind of no man left behind kind of thing.
Right.
But it's more complicated than that because I think they also eventually come to the revelation, maybe you could call it, that this is not just helping soldiers. All of humans experience stuff that troubles us.
Mhm.
The Buddha said, I suffer, therefore I am. I think we all have something. It might not be childhood sexual abuse or gun trauma. For some of us, those are true. For others, it might be more subtle. It might be things we don't even understand
Right.
or even remember. But do a lot of humans have low moments, difficulty, even moments where they feel like it's difficult to go on? Of course, right? That we all maybe more and more these days. And I think these guys, I think these guys in a funny way are kind of at the tip of the spear of helping us remind humanity that there are tools, that there are things that we can do. Part of that is psychedelics. Part of it is simply just talking about it.
Sure. Yeah.
Just having kind of presenting yourself as a vulnerable human, even if you're a big hulking guy, like sitting there telling these stories, which are revealing and vulnerable and raw, that in and of itself, I believe is really powerful. I hope that that's part of the, I don't know, I don't like the word message of the film, but it's probably what we wanted to show people that these guys are willing to do this and driven to do it.
Well, fittingly, you and I are having this conversation on Veterans Day, and I know your film. I think it debuted on Netflix on the 3rd of November. What kind of response have you heard since it's been out in the world on Netflix, which allows it to have such a vast global audience?
So grateful to Netflix for picking up this film. Bonnie and I have had the good fortune of having a number of our films on Netflix, and their team took a look at this and thought exactly what you just said. Here's an opportunity to show a really dramatic film that also has this really, I don't know, important stuff in it, kind of revelatory stuff in it to a 192 countries, hundreds of millions of subscribers. There is no platform like Netflix.
Yeah.
And certainly the military guys and their wives really like that idea that you could be American military sitting on a base in the Middle East or Europe or the Far East and watch this film on Netflix. The response has been tremendous. We're just kind of inundated with social media messages and media press about just how emotionally intense the film is and how thankful people are to the guys and Amber and Patsy for telling the story, for opening up and telling their story. We have stories of firefighters who are watching it in their break room with fellow first responders because they go through a lot of trauma, and then recommending to their union bosses that perhaps everybody should see this film as part of training. We've got stories of veterans watching the film 3 or 4 times in a week so that they could show it to their kids and their parents and their cousins and their friends to kind of give a sense of what they're going through. We have everyday people who are just happening by it in Japan and Korea. It's really just amazing what we're hearing. And that is just so heartening that the film is speaking to all sorts of audiences. I mean, the dream as a filmmaker is the audience surprises you, right? Every human being brings their own background to the story and then takes what they will from it. And that's really the dream for us.
Yeah, well, it's, to call it a powerful film is underselling it. It is in waves and war. It is available currently on Netflix, and I've been speaking with one of the co-directors, Jon Shenk, who co-directed it with his wife, Bonni Cohen. Jon, thank you so much for your time to talk about this film, and thank you for the film.
Thank you, Michael. It's been a pleasure.
One day this will end. Free in the knowledge that everything has changed. And this was just a